Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Judges chapters 4 and 5, where we read about the Deborah narrative in our continuing study of the book of Judges. Judges chapter 4, verse 1, Then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's going to be the continuing refrain that we're going to see. Notice after Ehud died, last time we looked at Ehud, the left-handed man, but now once he's died, the Israelites go after they go their own way. Verse 2, And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in, and I'm going to use the modern pronunciation. I know I used to call it Hazor until I went to Israel. They call it Hatzor, so forgive me if I do that. Who reigned in Hatzor, and the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Now notice the commander of the army, Sisera. I'm going to come back and look at that name. Not so much the meaning, but just what it sounds like. Sisera. What sort of evocation does that bring to mind? Well, hold that thought. And he lived in a place called Harosheth Hagoyim, the cutting of the nations. I'm not sure if it had that meaning back then, or even if it had that name back then. Maybe it got that name after the events of this chapter. Verse 3, the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the reason they cried out to the Lord is because this general, this commander, had 900 iron chariots. Remember, this is technically before the beginning of the Iron Age, or at least right at that time of the beginning of the Iron Age. And so iron is a carefully guarded secret. It was a trade secret, just like we don't give out the instructions on how to build nuclear weapons to just anybody that comes along. So likewise, it was a trademark secret, and the Israelites didn't know how to do that. And so here's someone who's technologically advanced. He has 900 iron chariots, and when we speak of iron chariots, that's speaking of the iron wheel. The spokes on the wheel could actually hold that wheel up, and it could actually change the way that warfare looked, where warfare now became, for that day and age, modernized. And so here's a king who oppresses the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. Verse 4, Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at the time. I think it's interesting that you have a woman judge. That's sort of unusual. Most of the judges are not women, but here's one that was. Verse 5, she used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. Apparently she was known for her wisdom and her judgments, and even had a place where she would sort of hold court. Verse 6, Now she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, Behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, Go and march to Mount Tabor. We'll look at Mount Tabor in just a moment. And take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. These are two of the tribes whose inheritance is in the north part of Canaan, what we call Galilee, or the Galilee, the circle. I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. And so the battle's going to take place in this wide open valley known as the Valley of Jezreel. Sometimes we popularly refer to it after a city that's called there, the city of Megiddo, and so that's given the name Har Megiddo or Armageddon. But it's known as the Valley of Jezreel, and there's a very small stream that flows through this valley. I guess it's small when I was there, small most of the times of the year. And they're to gather at Mount Tabor, which is at the eastern end of this valley. It's sort of the valley is wide and flat, and you've got this big sort of high hill, low mountain, however you want to describe it, at the eastern end of the valley. Verse 8, Then Barak said to her, If you will go with me, then I will go, but if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, because you put that stipulation, the honor shall not be yours on the journey that you're about to take. For the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman, and she's not talking about herself. she's talking about another woman who will be introduced later in the narrative. Well, Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. Verse 13, skipping down to verse 13, Sisera called together all his chariots, those 900 iron chariots that we'd heard about, and all the people who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. This is not a big river, but notice it's going to play a part in the story. Verse 14, Deborah said to Barak, Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him, these men from Naphtali and Zebulun. Verse 15, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. Now, we're not told how God did that. It's possible that we have in the next chapter, because next chapter is going to be a song of Deborah, we might have some hints along the way, or maybe not. Well, it goes on to say, and Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. Apparently the chariot was rendered, in one way or another, it was rendered useless. Because after all, it's a lot faster to go in a chariot with horses or some sort of domestic-sized animals pulling it than to go on foot. But he goes on foot, verse 16. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, the cutting of the nations, because that's what he's doing. He's cutting up the nations. And all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. And so, when we get to that song, I told you this was coming. In chapter 5, verse 21, we're going to read about how the torrent of Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. And that's poetic language, because Kishon is not a torrent, it's not a waterfall, it's not a big giant rushing river. In fact, when you see it from afar, you can't notice Kishon is that strip of greenery running across the central part of this picture. There's a road just past it, and it looks like a dirt road, and a highway just on this side of it. And that greenery is so small you can't even see the river. It's a tiny little stream, and yet here it's called as the torrent of Kishon. Makes me wonder, gee, did it rain really hard? Did it overflow its banks? Did the chariots get stuck in the mud? I don't know. We're just given this little tiny hint on what God might have done to give them victory. Verse 17, now Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hatzor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. Here's a peace that had been made, not between the Israelites and Jabin, king of Hazor, but rather with this one individual. He had made peace where quite frankly, there hadn't been peace, and maybe there shouldn't have been peace, because he was the enemy of the people of Israel. And Sisera goes to this tent that's supposed to be on his side of this conflict. And Jael, verse 18, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, Turn aside, my master, turn aside to me, do not be afraid. And he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. Verse 19, he said to her, Please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. So she opened a bottle of milk and gave him a drink, and then she covered him. And it is a ruse. Notice verse 20. He said to her, Stand in the doorway of the tent, and it shall be if anyone comes and inquires of you and says, Is there anyone here? That you shall say no. So she's supposed to be hiding him, because he thinks she is on his side. Verse 21, but Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg, something you'd normally use to fasten a tent, and seized a hammer in her hand and went secretly to him. Of course, it's going to be secure in just a second, and drove the peg into his temple. And it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted, and so he died. Notice, he dies at the hand of a woman who slays the enemy of God with a blow to the head. Now we get to chapter 5, and chapter 5 is going to give us the song that parallels the story. Judges chapter 5, verse 1, then Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, sang on that day, saying, and it becomes a hit, that the leaders led in Israel, that the people volunteered, bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O rulers. I to the Lord I will sing. I will sing praise to the Lord, the God of Israel. Verse 4, Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth quaked, the heavens also dripped, even the clouds dripped water, the mountains quaked at the presence of the Lord, this Sinai at the presence of the Lord, the God of Israel. And so it's pictured there being a connection. This God is the same God who led us at Sinai. Verse 6, in the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were deserted, and travelers went by roundabout ways. The peasantry ceased. They ceased in Israel until I, Deborah, arose, until I arose, a mother in Israel. Yes, things had been bad until the coming of Deborah. We get to verse 12. Awake, awake, Deborah. Awake, awake, sing a song. Arise, Barak, and notice the phrase here, and take away your captives. The way that you say that in Hebrew, to see the totalness of it, is take captivity captive. The word captives there is twice. Take captivity captives, O son of Abinoam. And it's striking that that term is used in Ephesians chapter 4 to describe, and it's quoting one of the Psalms when it does so, to describe what Jesus has done in the victory that he has achieved on our behalf at the cross, that he took captivity captive. In other words, he won the great battle. He defeated death and then rose from the dead. And so it's a picture, yes, of victory back then, but also we can sing this song of victory about how our captivity has been taken captive. Well, verse 19, the kings came and fought, and then fought the kings of Canaan at Anak, near the waters of Megiddo, and this is perhaps one of the early mentions of Megiddo. Of course, we're going to have that imagery in the book of Revelation, where the kings of the earth are gathered to this place of Megiddo, the Mount Megiddo, Har Megiddo, or we say Armageddon, and they took no plunder in silver. Verse 20, the stars fought from heaven, and this is poetic language. The stars didn't literally come down from their courses. They fought against Sisera, and in that same breath we have this figurative language of the Kishon. Don't take it too literally, necessarily. The torrent of Kishon swept them away, the ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. O my soul, march on with strength. Verse 24, most blessed of women is Jael. She was the hero of the day, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed is she of women in the tent. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a magnificent bowl, she brought him curds. Verse 26, she reached out her hand for the tent peg, and on her right hand for the workman's hammer, and she struck Sisera, she smashed his head, and she shattered and pierced his temple. Notice this imagery of a woman striking the enemy of God's people to the head. We're going to see it again in the book of Judges, and both times it should remind us of an ancient promise, an ancient prophecy that speaks of the seed of the woman striking the seed of the serpent upon the head, a fatal and mortal blow. It's a promise that you see all the way back from Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15. Verse 27, between her feet he bowed, he fell, he lay. Between her feet he bowed, he fell. Where he bowed, there he fell dead. And so the victory is complete. You get to verse 28, though, and now the scene changes to the homeland of Sisera. Out of the window she looked and lamented, the mother of Sisera through the lattice. Why does his chariot delay in coming? Why do the hoofbeats of his chariots tarry? This one who was the seed of this woman is looking out the window and asking, what's happened to him? Verse 29, her wise princesses would answer her. Indeed, she repeats her words to herself. Are they not finding? Are they not dividing the spoil? a maiden, 2 maidens for every warrior. To Sisera, a spoil of dyed work, embroidered, dyed work of double embroidery on the neck of the spoiler. In fact, here's this one who had gone out to spoil the people of Israel, to terrify them, to plunder them, to steal from them, and instead, the spoiler has himself been spoiled. Verse 31, thus let all your enemies perish, O Lord, but let those who love him be like the rising of the sun in its might. Don't we pray the same thing? Lord, may your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so the passage concludes, verse 31, and the land was undisturbed for 40 years.